So with that, my time is up. I'm happy to answer the first question. Man in the back.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. Two things, if I could. Number one, my name's Fred Teach. Live across the street in Biltmore Lake, and I want to take just a few seconds to thank Representative Moffitt for his efforts in helping us stay on the other side of the city dividing line and avoiding that ugly and awful, unfair forced annexation. We very much appreciate his efforts. Question to you is, I know that the problems at the state level are not nearly as difficult as at the federal level in terms of the enmity and the animosity that exists from both fringes. You talked about a lot of us being in the middle, and clearly I am, most of our friends are. We find it horribly frustrating to see what goes on as end fights end. Do you see a way for the middle to start to take control again and bring some rationality and common sense to the process?
Officials, I want to come back to annexation too. A lot of it has to come from people who actually embrace what extremes on the right or left may say, but don't like the way the message is being conveyed or the process that they're trying to use to actually have a meaningful impact. And that's why we have the polarization. We don't have the polarization because the elected officials have decided to become polarized. We have polarization because we have very vocal minorities on both ends of the political spectrum that are forcing elected officials to try and navigate this complex process of primaries and general elections. I, for one, think that I more often than not, when I receive a criticism, and it's at that level, I call people back, and I speak with them. And I try to ask them why they're behaving this way. And they're one of two people. They're just people who have heard one side of the argument and just really genuinely want to hear the other side. They're the other people who aren't there as much to solve that problem as is to gain enough people to end progress of an ideology that they disagree with. You can't deal with that one. But I think what we really need are people who are right of center and left of center to say the nonsense that's slowing government down on either end of the spectrum needs to stop. And on annexation, I am the person who actually, the annexation people hated for a little while. And the reason they hated me was the Senate passed the moratorium bill out 2 or 3 weeks into session, and they wanted us to pass a moratorium on the House side. And I want to use that because it kind of plays into your prior question. Because I was there for 4 years in the minority, I saw the red shirts, the annexation reform people, and the League of Municipalities mass every year. For the 4 years that I was down there before I was elected speaker. And every year we spent countless hours of coming out. I've come out and spoke on the legislative hall when people were calling for annexation reform, said I support it, but you need to talk to the leadership at the time. I also told the League of Municipalities, as a former town commissioner, I understood that we needed to manage this and allow towns to responsibly grow. So when the moratorium bill came up, I said, we're not going to do it. And I got beat up on both sides. The town people said, well, why can't you just say we're not going to do anything? I said, because we are. And the annexation people said, well, why don't you pass this bill and then we'll negotiate from a position of strength? I said, because if you get a moratorium, you're going home. You got what you want. Why in the world would you negotiate for something less than the home run? And so that was a classic example and something that you were emotionally attached to, that I had to sit people down and sit them in my office and say, guys, we are going to solve this problem. We're not going to do what the past leaders have done and just try to play win or lose. And that's why I think we have a balanced policy. We may tweak it over time, but I think it's fundamentally sound, respectful to the interests of both sides.
Good for you. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, Mr. Tillis. The first 3 things that you said were jobs bills. Those are tax cuts. And the thing with the tax cut, that's good if you're getting it, but if you ask any business, I don't care what you're doing, we need customers. And if customers don't have a job making enough money to buy my stuff, whatever my stuff is, you don't make it. Another question I have is, you did cut funding for education. That is no fact. And it hadn't
9.8%.
And it hadn't been for the stimulus, we wouldn't have been able to keep our teachers on jobs. And coming from a state that did go ahead and privatize those schools, and boy, they look good. They look good, they're not. Florida schools are a disaster. It has turned into a disaster. It is pure PR. Every company opens up, I'm the greatest school, I'm the greatest school, and here's my great room. Unfortunately, my daughter works at one of those great little preschools, and she has a beautiful room. It has toys, it has things. But you know what? There's not enough classrooms for all those children. So they gotta move. Every 20 minutes, they move. Parents don't know this. Pay your voucher, they learn nothing. They learn nothing. My last thing that I really am interested in is workman's comp. I don't know what your bill contains, and I know you're trying to keep the cost down. I was a builder in Florida. Workman's comp was always a bee in our bonnet. We went to Tallahassee and thought we fixed it. There was one fix, and I don't know what you guys did, because I haven't read it. But we could exempt the first four. You know, the president, treasurer, vice president, and secretary. Anybody else after that, we had to start paying. And it was big bucks, as you know. The problem with that is it let the big Centex and U.S. Homes and everybody else come on in, and they're employing thousands of people. I was local scattered on houses. I built over 1 million homes over 20 years with the same 20 subs all that time. But I couldn't add on another person. One more person meant now I'm stuck with workman's comp. That's a way to keep us little guys small. Unless I hired 50, it wouldn't make physical sense. So I don't know if that's what you guys did. I'm sure you didn't, because you're killing us. You're killing the little guys.
I would have to tell you that when you're in a committee room and you see the Advocates for Justice, which is the North Carolina Personal Injury Attorneys Organization, people most focus on advocating for the injured person, standing on this side of the podium, and the State Chamber of Commerce standing on that side of the podium, and both endorsing the bill. That's about as good of a balance as you can strike. And I might add, if I may finish, I'd let you.
I'm sorry.
And if I may add, that the National Federation of Independent Businesses, which is the small business organization that has anywhere from 5 to 50, they also endorsed it. So I would suggest, rather than you assuming that our bill wasn't balanced or following Florida, if I may, that you take a look at the bill, because it was very widely supported. And as a matter of fact, the vote in the House was, I believe, almost unanimous. It was probably 110. So it was a bipartisan bill. That was another example, like annexation, that people had held that at bay forever. And it was not benefiting injured people or businesses. And we took the hits and we got where we wanted to and created a consensus bill. For the life of me, I don't know why as a leader you wouldn't spend more time trying to get consensus on these things so you can set that aside and have more capacity to do more things. Now, on your point about education, the budget was cut 9.8%. I'll use the conservative estimates. You got you got other people that said it was 5.8. Let's use the high-end number, say 9.8. The overall budget was cut 12%. Community colleges were cut 10%. Universities were cut 12% system-wide. They had variances based on system. The number of teaching positions funded by state government increased, but the overall number of teaching positions went down. Without question, there's no finesse in that. I would ask former leaders, what were you thinking funding increases in positions with money you knew wasn't going to be there on a recurring basis? But that's a problem I embrace. It's my problem to solve now. And I would also ask local governments, if they have the rainy day fund options, why they're not using them in the same way that we're tapping into rainy day source options before they raise taxes. And the problem with education, it's a question I ask everybody, that there are some people who are very concerned with education now, and they're suggesting that this budget is the problem. And the question I would have for most of you here, how many of you were perfectly satisfied with K through 12 education? Don't change a thing up until June 30th of 2011. I mean, you know, I've been a parent volunteer for years, product of public schools. I was PTA president at Hopewell High School 6 years ago. Actively involved teachers advocate. there are fundamental problems that we need to change in K through 12. And for anyone to suggest it's just about money would have to say that if we just raise the taxes, that's all we need to do to fix it. And what we've said is let's first find out, is the money being spent properly? Are teachers who are performing at the highest levels being compensated properly? Are all teachers being treated respectfully? And let's do this a little bit differently. You have to look no further than the state of Florida to know that overall North Carolina does better on education outcomes. But I would respectfully disagree with you to say that some of the stuff that's going on in Florida doesn't have relevance here. Some of it's in K through 12. Some of it could be through charter schools and other things. To suggest that all the other ones are bad would be as wrong, I think, all the private school options are bad, would be as wrong and ill-advised as saying all K through 12 traditional public schools are bad, because neither is the case. And we need to fix them. And I think that the way that we do that is through education reform. Finally, about jobs. I believe, and this is that you got an economic worldview or a philosophy one way or the other. I believe putting $1.5 billion back in the private sector is a more efficient vehicle for job creation than putting $1.5 billion into the public sector. And I will only point to what's happening with the federal stimulus dollars to recognize that it has to end. Okay? Now we're in $1 trillion territory or $5 trillion territory over some number of years. But the fact of the matter is, the money, the same thing, increasing taxes, taking more to create jobs has not worked at a national level, and reallocating resources at the state level will not work either. That $600 million back into the private sector has a higher potential for creating jobs than anything the state could do. And I know I thought maybe you were trying to make the correlation between the taxes coming out of your pockets and the jobs for people who would come and buy your products. But I would argue that those employers, having them create private sector jobs, is the customer base that will always be there and not be subject to budget fluctuations for government personnel. If you have a follow-up, I'll let you come back after this lady speaks.
Hello, and thank you for coming to Western North Carolina. We appreciate that. My name is Janice Brummett, and I'm a local businesswoman, and I also pay taxes in Mecklenburg County. So
we thank you for that.
I knew you would say that. Thank you. But more importantly, today I'm here to talk about mission hospitals and mission health. And we are very concerned, because I'm the chair of the board, that the recent CON committee that has been established has got some very critical restrictions that they think that they might place on mission health system, and that would restrict us very significantly on job creation, on delivery of health care in Western North Carolina, and that's just goes in the face of what you were saying about job creation and regulation. And so we would like for you very seriously to look at those recommendations, take a close look at that, because we are the most regulated hospital in the state. We are only one of the 3 in the nation that serves under Certificate of Public Advantage, and we have lived up to the letter of the law of that. But we want to continue to give quality health care to the people of Western North Carolina, and being the only tertiary hospital, we wish you would take a look at that and keep us whole if you could.
Yeah, well, a couple of things. I've met